Hey all, hope all is well. This is another video in the Road to Grandmaster series, and this one I'm going over my round 1 game from the St. Louis Norm Invitational. So, where we left off in the last video, it actually finished off round 9 at the Grenke Chess Open in Germany, and I had flown back to the United States, and we are now in the month of May of 2019. So, I was actually, the 1st of May, I was actually at my peak rating thus far, 2468 FIDE, and, I felt great. I mean, I hadn't gotten the second GM norm yet, but I was in a position where, at 68, you're 32 points away from 2,500, and just really ecstatic that I was able to have back-to-back really positive tournaments in Europe and, with Grenke and then with Reykjavik. And, I was just in really good spirits. And May also happens to be my birthday month. So I was hoping to build on that continuity. Unfortunately, in May, my health took a turn for the worse. If you can recall, I spoke a little bit briefly about the tournaments in January, really playing, just being really bad for me, a large part because my health played such a significant negative role. And to be quite frank, I've actually been dealing with some serious health issues over the course of the entire year and am still battling those. But at certain points during the year, it was much worse than others. And so this tournament would actually turn out to be the most devastating tournament of my career, the most tragic of my career. And quite frankly, you're going to see in many games over the next 9 rounds in this event where I just collapse very uncharacteristically. I play very poorly, and you're going to be kind of wondering, well, what's wrong? What's happened with where's the Kassa that I normally see? Where's the energy? Where's the precision? And it's just not there. It's lacking in a lot of points, in large part because of my health. Now, I'm going to comment largely on just the chess aspects of the games, and, I'm just going to be explaining away a lot of mistakes. But, you can also say that, in the back of your head, you could say, well, he really isn't quite right here, and it shows, because it definitely will. Now, in any case, even if you are not in great shape and you lose games, there's always chess lessons to be learned. So I'm going to try and focus mainly on the chess lessons from these games, but I gave you fair warning. So in any case, this tournament was St. Louis Norm Invitational, and it's actually was quite an interesting event for me because the St. Louis Chess Club is now world famous, world renowned, and in many respects is the quote-unquote chess capital of the world because they have so many high-level events there because of the Sinkfelds and what they've done for chess in the United States and abroad. So St. Louis has been like a real destination, and I hadn't been to the club before, so it was interesting to take a visit and actually play a tournament there, and this opportunity came up, and I was really excited to play there just because you think that there is a little bit of a stage playing in St. Louis. You want to play well, and again, I had been playing well in the month of April. But, it was not to be, unfortunately. So anyways, my opponent in this one was Cemil Ali Marandi. Now, if you actually see in the name of the video, his name starts with a C. His first 2 names start with a C, but it's actually pronounced like a J in Turkish. So that's why actually a lot of his friends call him JJ. And Cemil or JJ is actually a Grandmaster from Turkey that is playing chess quite a bit in the United States as he goes to St. Louis University. So he goes to one of these chess schools, if you will, that give talented chess players full ride scholarships. Now, without further ado, let me get into it. So I was black, and I'd actually looked at a lot of his games, and JJ was primarily playing the London system, and so I spent a lot of work there, and it turned out he did trot that out. And so I went d4, d5, bishop f4, and lo and behold, we have a London system, and I was like, okay, that's good, I guessed correctly. That's usually the first step with preparation. And after bishop f4, I went knight f6, e3, e6, knight d2. This is a kind of unique move order. I mean, it's played sometimes, but more often than not, the knight comes to f3 first. But knight d2 is also appropriate. I think the idea is that if I go for a quick c5, c3, and queen b6, white can respond with queen b3. So let's say c5, c3, queen b6. Note that now that my bishop is blocked in the chain because of the e6 pawn, if I go c4, he can just go queen c2 back, and there's no bishop f5 to harass the queen. So that's part of the benefit of going for this really quick knight d2 move order. The other benefit probably to this move order with knight d2 is that, well, I guess it doesn't really matter so much because the bishop's outside of the chain, but there are certain circumstances where, you know, maybe bishop g4 is a pin on this knight on f3, and essentially if you delay playing bishop knight f3, that's not allowed. But here, okay, e6 hems the bishop in, so the move order isn't so critical. But anyways, after knight d2, I went for bishop d6. And this position should not be foreign to you if you've seen any of my games on this channel. I've had this London system set up. I believe I had it once in January in the Bay Area International with black. I'm sure I've had it. I mean, I can recall having it quite a few times this year, so I'm sure that I've had positions similar to this on the channel, but the idea is actually just to oppose this bishop on the diagonal and actually fight for the e5 square, which is kind of a central critical square for the white side in these structures. In many respects, white tends to take over the e5 square and get an initiative on the king side by playing like bishop d3, knight f3, knight e5, sometimes putting the bishop back and then playing f4, and so on. And it's sometimes difficult to, you know, get out of that bind. So I'm just trying to challenge right away. After bishop d6, white went bishop g3, and I played b6. Now, I don't want to take on g3 right away because this actually opens up the h line for the white rook. And so typically there's like a little bit of a stare down that happens here where neither side is really trying to capture, and we're trying to make useful waiting moves before we do so, because again, I don't want to open the h line, and he doesn't want to like help my queen develop, if you will. So after b6, c3 is played. Normal London system move, setting up that triangle of pawns. I castled, knight gf3, and c5, attacking this center. And this is fairly standard stuff. White does have control of the e5 square, but at the same time, I might try to challenge it as well by going knight c6, maybe putting my queen on c7, trying to eye that square. So after c5, white now went a4, and a4 is actually quite interesting and a nice little finesse that doesn't happen. It does happen in these structures, but not usually this early. The idea is to kind of entertain a5, ultimately undermining my my queen side, because if a5 comes, it's kind of a annoying pawn tension. Note that I don't really want to take on a5 with my b pawn, because then I ruin my pawn structure, and he can probably recover that pawn by playing queen a4 eventually, or picking it off later. And at the same time, if I keep the tension after a5, he always has the option of taking and opening up the file for his rook, or even going a5, a6, and sometimes challenging a bishop that comes to b7. And in structures where the pawn is actually on a6, it's kind of interesting, because it's like, you know, you're kind of wondering, is this pawn going to be a strength or a weakness? It can be a strength in endgames because, you know, it's so close to the queening square that if a7 comes under fire, it's a problem. But the flip side is that it can also be a target on a6. So usually this pawn can come to a5, and it's just an annoying pawn tension. After a4, I went queen c7, just kind of ignoring the a5 push. I wasn't really keen on, you know, dealing with it prophylactically. One way you can try to do that is by playing a6. But I thought in certain circumstances, playing b5 might be a little bit annoying, and a5 and then b5 could be a little bit annoying. And I thought that I was slightly weakening my b6 pawn by playing a6, so I thought it wasn't necessarily worth it to weaken my chain to prophylactically deal with the a5 push. So yeah, so I opted for queen c7. After queen c7, white played bishop d3, And now I opted for bishop b7, but I actually believe this move was a mistake, a slight mistake. I think it would have been a little bit smarter to play knight bd7. And the reason for that is now with my queen on c7, knight on d7, and bishop on d6, I actually have really great coverage over the e5 square, and white actually is not in time to put a piece there. Because actually, if he puts the knight there, he only has two defenders, the pawn on e5 and the bishop on g3, so I could just take it and win a pawn. So actually, queen c7 would have been, knight bd7 would have been a really nice way to corral the e5 square, and then I can play bishop b7 next. And that's kind of an important difference. I think the reason that I was a little bit wary about playing bishop b7 was I was a little bit worried about e4. Sometimes in these structures, you have a problem where this rook on a8 is kind of loose. But the truth is here, a queen isn't on e2, so it's not like mate is threatened after the recapture on e4. For instance, let's say I just waste a move with like a6 let's just say let's say knight bd7 is played, queen e2, and then a6. Now e4 is kind of dangerous because the fork is threatened, and if I take multiple times on e4, you can see that there's a dual threat of checkmate on h7, and the a8 rook is hanging. But because the queen was not on e2, e4 is not really a problem here because I can just take multiple times and then go rook b8, no harm, no foul. And, it would seem that I have a reasonable position. One thing to note is that if d takes c5, which does actually challenge my bishop with the queen here, I can actually take on g3 and then play knight f6, and I actually defend h7 and attack e4, and I can recover my c5 pawn in a moment. Note that if c takes b6, I can just play queen takes b6, or maybe rook takes b6 is better actually. And the point is that blackish. Well, actually, I like queen takes b6. Let me take this back. And the point is that I can take on b2 next with my queen after he defends the e4 bishop. So pretty much there weren't any major things to worry about after knight takes e4. And yeah, it's just not a problem. The other thing is I actually don't have to take on e4 and give the bishop this diagonal. I can also play bishop takes g3 first, and after h takes g3, again, either go bishop b7 or even just go h6. And the point is, there's no tactics that work on h6 or on the h file, at least to my eye yet. And you can see I'm actually, my king is relatively safe. I'm close to connecting my rooks after bishop b7. And black's kind of in a good spot. So just to sum that up, again, knight b d7 would have been way more prudent here to corral the e5 square. Now, because I played bishop b7, I actually cede control of e5 temporarily because now I don't have the appropriate coverage on that square. And this allows JJ to get, a very important and fairly standard maneuver in, which is first bishop takes d6. I think that's a reasonable move. And after queen takes d6, knight e5. And now the idea is he's traded the dark square bishops, which means I don't have as much dark square coverage in the position. And he's put this knight on e5, and, well, I'm not in a position where I'm going to be able to trade on e5 anytime soon because, well, there's a fork action here, and he's probably going to reinforce the knight with f4. So, again, black is actually fine here. I mean, one square does not a position make, if you will. So I still have resources. I'm still castled first. I'm going to connect my rooks first. All is not lost or anything, but definitely would have been a little bit more precise to play knight bd7. So anyways, given the new circumstance, I actually have to figure out how to deal with this knight on e5. How do I evict it? Because frankly, if the knight on e5 stays here for too long, he can build up a very dangerous initiative connected to f4, castles, sometimes rook f3, rook h3, sometimes queen f3, queen h3, and then just hammering away at my king side. Sometimes even g4, g5 is in the cards. So I really had to be wary of some of these maneuvers, and I was, and I decided, okay, I need to try and evict this knight. And so I actually decided to play bishop a6. The idea here was actually to neutralize some of the pressure that he might have on my king side and then tend to the knight a little bit later. So I thought, with this bishop a6 move, I'm definitely encouraging my knight to get to a kind of wayward square. But at least in the long term, he wouldn't have this sort of glaring pressure on h7. So if bishop takes a6, knight takes a6, castles. White is definitely, I think a little bit better here, just because my knight's a little bit off here, and white still has this a5 idea in the cards. But at the same time, black's actually quite solid with a nice pawn chain and, well, actually one really uniform pawn chain, right? And it's very unlikely that my king is going to come under fire with no longer this pressure on h7. So I felt pretty good about this exchange kind of neutralizing white a little bit. And then I would hunt after try to evict the e5 knight. But instead, after bishop a6, JJ went for a move that really surprised me, honestly. I did not take it seriously. I really didn't think it was very good. And the move that he went for was bishop c2. And this move surprised me a great deal. Really because I thought that, it kind of, didn't really solve his castling problem, essentially. Like, I thought that, by moving this bishop and ignoring the trade, he couldn't castle, and then his king would be stuck in the center, and I would have a great position. So I thought, objectively, this was really not an intelligent decision. But I realized here that, JJ is actually quite an ambitious player, and that, by keeping this bishop on the board, he actually didn't mind to keep his king in the center a little while longer if it meant to keep some attacking chances in the position. So I didn't really have such a great, player profile for what to expect from JJ as far as stylistically. But this actually told me he had very aggressive intentions because, frankly, this is not the best move, but it definitely is challenging. And it says, I'm trying to attack you. Like, we're not trading pieces here. You're not getting some really easy position to play. You're going to have to make some moves. And so after bishop c2, I decided, well, now this king is stuck in the middle for a little while. I'm definitely going to open up the middle. And the first thing I can do to do that is challenge this knight on e5. So I went knight c6 here, just trying to trade this knight, connect my rooks. And I was thinking if this knight ever leaves the c6, I can maybe play e5 and open up the position before the king is castled. So I tried to move very quickly to get that done. White now went for the very natural f4, saying, no, we're not going to trade, I'm not going to trade this knight away super easily. And if you take, well, first of all, there's a fork here, so I lose a piece. But second of all, in any exchange after f takes e5, the f file will be open. My rook will maybe get in the game eventually, and I'll have more of a profile to get initiative on your king. So very, very interesting idea. Now, the one thing I thought, again, how is this king on e1 going to really do anything, given the fact that my bishop is on a6 eyeing that diagonal? How can the rook get in the game? How can the king get safe? I really was not certain of this. I went knight d7 now, trying to get my knight out of the way, and I thought I had an idea of actually taking on e5 or even sometimes playing f6. And the point is just to try and evict this knight and get my own play going. White now went king f2, and this was a huge, huge shock to me because it looked so artificial. It just looked like something that is really ugly and didn't make a lot of sense. But actually, I think it really showed, JJ's creativity and just the flair he has for, his London systems and his type of chess. Because basically his argument was, yeah, you're covering the f1 square, but I'm actually going to, connect my rooks artificially, and, it takes me a little bit more time, but I'm still going to have this bind on the dark squares. And it actually isn't as crazy as it looks. Now, in this particular move order, it was incorrect, but to my surprise, when I analyzed this with the computer actually liked the move knight takes d7 first, and then after queen takes d7, king f2, and was giving a position that was equal. And I was really surprised by this. I thought there's no way that this should be a position that is playable for white. But if you consider it for a moment, I don't have any quick pawn breaks that are favorable. Like, I can't get e5 in right away. I mean, cd4 doesn't look too great because he can just recapture. And he really does have a nice dark square bind, so he actually can afford, doing this. He can actually spend the time to do this. And then the flip side is that the difference in bishops here, is kind of important because in the short term, yeah, I'm covering f1. But in the long term, this bishop is eyeing my king, and this one might be a little bit more valuable. Especially because all his pawns are set up on dark squares behind the bishop, which has a lot of scope, and my pawns are set up on light squares, so endgames might also be a little tricky. So yeah, slightly better version would be to take and go king d7 then, but he went king f2 first. Now, I was thinking here, how do I kind of open up this position? I mean, you see here the king is lined up against the rook. I also recognize that he wasn't going to go king g1 right away because the rook on h1 needs to get in the game. And so I was like, how do I play against this king? Now, one thing I considered was playing f6, but I rejected that because I thought that after knight takes c6, queen takes c6, queen h5 was something that really looked quite unpleasant to me, threatening mate in many positions, and I didn't want to push a pawn on a light square and give up another dark square. So note that if I play f5 now, I've managed to shut off this checkmating idea, but now this knight potentially has the e5 square to run into, which is not really ideal. And I also give him a potential hook for a g4 break. And then, there's just some pressure on my king. So because of that, I decided that it would be a little bit smarter to actually take on e5. And the point is that after he took with the f pawn, again, trying to keep the f line open for his pieces eventually, I can actually go queen e7 and force the f file open with f6. So I thought this was a little bit cleaner because now if he tries to go for these checkmating ideas, these brazen checkmating ideas, I can just go g6. And my queen is also close to the king side, and there's no attack here with the bishop totally limited. And I didn't give up my control over the e5 square like I did in the other lines. Now the queen would have to retreat, and then I just go f6, and, black is in good shape here. So after I took, I thought I was in pretty good shape. After f takes e5, I went queen e7. And now white went rook e1. And, it just seems so strange to me that he could get away with this. My rooks are connected. My bishop is covering the f1 square. My knight seems reasonably well placed here. And I was like, I've got to be better here. And I am. I am better. But it actually is not as clear as I thought, and precision was required. So I played f6. That's a good first move, just trying to open up the line. Note that if I play f5, he's not going to take it. He's just going to move the king away and, kind of be scot-free. So it's very important that I play f6 because it forces white to take. And after f6, e takes f6, I have the first decision on my hands. First critical decision. And the decision is, how do you recapture that pawn on f6? Why don't you pause the video and think about it? I know at the board I spent about 20 minutes on it. So why don't you pause the video and take a think? All right, hopefully you got a chance to try to work out the details of each capture. The move that I made was actually not the best move. I actually played queen takes f6 check. And I think part of the reason I did that is because in some lines I thought queen f2 would be super attractive to play queen f2 check afterward. Yeah, this move was not ideal. Better would have actually been to play rook takes f6 check. And the point is you get the a rook in the game really quickly, and the queen is still on this diagonal and can get in via h4 later. The key detail is that after rook takes f6, and if white goes for king g1 is the better move, but if white goes for knight f3, I actually have g5 here. And g5 I thought was it was a move I was always looking at, but I thought, it shouldn't work. And the point is that after king g1, I actually go rook a f8, and there's some huge problems tactically for white. The thing that you have to notice is that if knight takes g5, there's actually rook f1 check, which wins on the spot. Because after the subsequent capture, the bishop is actually holding the f1 square, and white loses his queen. But to add insult to injury, the knight on g5 is also hanging. So if you recapture the bishop, I also just take this knight, and I'm just up significant material, right? Queen for rook. So that's one important detail. And so you can't actually take the pawn on g5. And I was always thinking, well, I could go g4, but I'm weakening a lot of squares, and the knight can go back to d2, and then the g4 pawn is hanging. Well, not the case, because he can't take it. And then additionally, after rook af8, white kind of has to deal with the g4 threat because of that rook f1 move. And because of that, you'd say, oh, h3, right? Just defending g4, holding up this attack. I thought, okay, now it kind of is stalling and white can coordinate. Well, actually not the case. It turns out here, black has the very strong g4, just ripping open white's king side. The point being that after h takes g4, now black goes queen c7, and all of a sudden there are decisive threats connected to rook takes f3 and queen g3 check. Queen d2, rook takes f3, takes, is just decisive. This bishop, again, is holding the f1 square, and this rook and queen are going to do some real damage. And it's just over, honestly. So that was the key thing, is to double the rooks very quickly and then try to entertain sacrifices. But the key detail that I missed is that, in many of the lines, g5 doesn't need to be defended after the king retreats. I can just continue on with my attack. And so that was something I should have definitely have played. Instead, after takes f6, I played queen takes f6. And after knight f3, I don't have the same type of energy because the rook is still stuck on a8. So there's just not the same type of arsenal with rook f1, with a piece on f1, giving check. So here I was thinking, okay, by playing with my f-pawn, I did weaken my pawn chain, and I thought endgames here would actually be kind of playable for white because, well, you could see white's pawns are set up on dark squares and mine are set up on light, and white also has this potential push of a5 a little bit later, causing me some consternation on the a file. And so I imagined here that with queens off the board, it actually would be easier to play white's position, believe it or not. And this really concerned me, and I thought, okay, I really need to get some initiative going on the king now. So I decided to play g5. And g5 is a good move. Again, trying to play g4, trying to get this attack on the king. But you can, again, see that if the rooks were doubled, this would be a much, much more significant threat. I think the whole thing with me playing queen takes f6 is that I saw that my queen is actually supporting the g5 pawn, so I don't actually have to defend it after he plays h3. And it turns out that I actually didn't need to defend it anyway. So anyways, after g5, white went h3, defending the g4 thrust. And here I have another critical position where I have to kind of figure out how to proceed with my initiative. And again, I took a step in the wrong direction. I need to be kind of totally aggressive here before white coordinates, because if I, again, allow white to go king g1 and then maybe queen d2, like white starts to get some control in the position, and again, the end games now are not so hot for me. So the move I should have played was h5, and the point is to threaten g4 and kind of force white's reaction, king g1. But after king g1, now I go rook f7, and I'm threatening g4 in many circumstances, and even playing rook af8. And there's some lines where I have queen f2 check, and sometimes where I can deliver mate on the h file. So very, very important I play h5 to get at this potential hook on white's king side. Instead, I played rook f7, trying to double right away, and it's just frankly a step in the wrong direction. Now, after king g1, I actually have another opportunity to go back to the line that's good with h5, and then it would transpose to something we just talked about. But unfortunately, h5 just didn't seem super realistic to me right now, and I thought it was time to get, all my pieces in, and so I went rook af8, but it's just a little bit too slow tactically because it allows white to create some distraction in the center of the board. Again, instead, h5 was critical because I need to be able to open up lines as quickly as possible before white strikes in the center and give myself maximum attacking prospects and really get at this hook. So anyways, after rook af8, white now went e4, and I think this was a really good move by JJ and just kind of demonstrated his alertness in the position, that he understood that, there was a storm cloud brewing on the king side. And typically when you're playing on the flanks, or when your opponent is playing on the flanks or trying to get initiative in the flank, you want to counter in the center. And so, e4 makes a lot of sense in that regard. The other thing is that my center is actually kind of delicate from the standpoint that I don't really want this position to open up for this bishop to get very active, maybe even play on this diagonal. I'm frankly just not ready for it. So was not very happy to see this. And frankly, to get to this position, I had bundled up oodles and noodles of time. I'd spent a ton of time here, and JJ was playing extremely quickly, I think being at home in his London setups. So I was actually down, I think, about 40 minutes or so, and was already in serious time trouble, which definitely had a factor. So after e4, I already thought, okay, e5 might be a threat, but also e takes d5 seemed like a threat, just trying to open up my center and get at my pawns. And so now I played c takes d4, trying to at least take on d4 before the queen could get involved in the d file. And after e takes d5, I had another really important challenge because this is a very, very good move on white's part. The point is that if you go c takes d4 to recapture now, I have the nice finesse knight b4 if I want. And the point is I hit this bishop with tempo, which is quite valuable. And I also managed to kind of, keep an eye on the d5 square. So if need be, I could potentially take on e4 and then reroute my knight to that nice blockading square. And the other thing about knight b4 is that if he plays like bishop b3, my knight maybe can even go to d3 at some point. But by playing, e takes d5 right away, he's challenging my knight, and you can see I can't jump to the middle because it's hanging, and I can't go to b4 because it's still covered. So very, very nice intermediate move, taking that pawn instead of the natural recapture on d4. Unfortunately, after e takes d5, I need to play e takes d5, but now this pawn on d5 is very weak, and it's isolated, and it's just not the outcome I wanted. White now played c takes d4, and you could see here again that if the queens come off the board, right, if you just imagine the queens off the board, white is actually the one for choice because my pawn is on a light square that's easily targeted by this bishop on b3, and his isn't, and he also has a nice long open file on the e file to work with. So I'm kind of, in a position now where all of my, assets are short-term assets. It's all about the attack. And if my attack fizzles out, I'm going to have a problem. So I tried to be very, very quick here and aggressive, and I went for the move queen f4. And the idea was to now force through g4 on the very next move, or in some lines to consider playing queen g3 and introduce the rook takes f3 idea. But the issue is this is just a little bit too slow. Instead, a better move would have been rook g7. And the point is that now I'm not only threatening to play g4, but my rook is on the same line as the king, and that makes his king extremely airy. So after rook g7, if white goes bishop b3, knight e7 protects d5, and I'm threatening g4 still. And yeah, the position is equal here, I would say. Black is actually not better because I took a little bit too long, and I still haven't gotten this g4 break in. And white has actually managed to consolidate quite decently. But the point is that I'm revving up for it, and so I'm almost there, and it's still practically a tough defense for white. Instead, after queen f4, I give white this kind of free hand, if you will, and white took the opportunity and played bishop b3, and now I have problems of my own because I can't rush with g4 anymore, because after h takes g4, queen takes g4, well, bishop takes bishop takes d5, and this pin means that rook takes f3 isn't a threat yet, and I just lose an exchange. So very, very important move, bishop b3, and again, it stalls me from playing g4. And the question is, at this point, is like, am I ever going to get to play it? Because it's taken forever for me to get to play. After bishop b3, I went for bishop c4, trying to neutralize this bishop. But I definitely did this kind of begrudgingly, because I recognized that after this exchange, which happened, now this d-pawn could become a factor, and it's just in general kind of unpleasant for me. And I think white definitely has the better of it because, again, I still have not played g4. So the position is actually still equal as I say that. I think I'm saying white has the better of it because I'm down like 40, 50 minutes and I'm in serious time trouble. So it's difficult when I didn't really get the play I wanted, and now, I'm kind of neutralized and there's still a lot of game left. And I was thinking that if white goes d5, this wouldn't actually be a huge deal because I can go knight b4 and then my knight could come to d3 and be very active. But JJ played a very good practical decision with the move knight e5. And the reason I think this is so strong is because you're attacking my rook on f7 and my knight on c6. And you're forcing through trades which neutralize my attack. And at the same time, you're keeping an eye on the g4 break with this queen on d1. And so it's very difficult for me now because I have to decide, well, do I want to take on e5? Do I want to allow this d-pawn to be a source of counterplay to harass my rooks? Do I want to move my rook somewhere? Then it's off the f-file and away from the file where I'm trying to attack. So very, very frustrating to see this move. Now, I didn't have much time to think on this, so I guess it's kind of understandable that I missed this detail. But the best move in the position would have been rook c7. And the point is that the d-pawn is actually much less dangerous than it would be as an e-pawn because it's not harassing my rooks with tempo on the f-file as it pushes. And after knight takes e6, rook takes e6, it also can be easily blockaded. Like if d5, rook f6, and note that d6 is not in the cards, and it's not. And the other thing is that the pawn on d5 is not actually supported by the rook at all. So, this pawn isn't going anywhere, and the position should probably fizzle out into a draw. Instead, the way I captured with knight takes e5, after d takes e5, I have to worry about e6 and e7 coming with tempo and really cramping my style. So even though the position is technically equal, this e-pawn is a huge factor, and my pawn majority isn't going anywhere for the time being. So anyways, I went rook e7 now, trying to kind of, control this pawn, get a handle on it before it became too dangerous. But you could see I'm already a little bit distracted from my play on the f-file. And, two pieces on this f-line is not as good as the Alekhine gun would have been. So, yeah. White now went queen d5 check, which is a good move, just challenging my king. And then after king g7, he went e6. And you can see this queen is doing a great job on this square. It's kind of a global piece. It's eyeing the king side here. It's eyeing the g5 pawn here. And it's even protecting e6. So really, really nice multi-purpose piece. And white's kind of taking over the initiative a little bit. Now, I went g4 because I recognized that there was danger in this position for me, and I thought I need to get some counterplay and not get squeezed because I saw if this rook comes into the game, I'm kind of in trouble. So I thought now's the time I can maybe get some type of perpetual, some type of initiative. And my point was that if h takes g4 now, I actually was going to go for the draw after queen f2, king h2, queen f2, and just a repetition. And so I was kind of keen on shutting this game down now. I'd seen enough. I was not better in the position. This pawn on e6 is really annoying my rooks, reducing my activity. So I was like, let's make a draw. And so g4 I thought was this move that was reasonable. I'm getting closer to that, the prospect of a draw. Let's make it happen. After g4, though, white played rook e4, and this move was kind of surprising to me because I thought, well, this can't be super realistic, right? You're allowing queen f2 with tempo, and, well, I just thought, does that really work? And I get to play f takes g3, g takes h3, and it turns out that there is a resource for me here. After queen f2 check and king h1, g takes h3 is huge. And the point is that if g takes h3, well, I have another perpetual with queen f3 check and queen f2 check, and I can secure a draw. But instead, after g takes h3, white played rook g4 check. And this was his idea, is that his rook is actually coming over, hitting my king, and now the queen's also back protecting g2. And all of a sudden, his rook is super active on my king on g7. And I don't have many moves. In fact, I only have one move. If I step up with king h6, there's queen g5 mate. And if I step up with king f6, well, that's also going to be mate. Queen g5 is probably a goner. And then rook e4, and he'll take a rook with check, and that'll be over. So I only have one move, and it's to the corner, king h8, where I have no squares. And it's like, wow, this position looks really dodgy. But I did think that, if he does take on h3 now, I have queen f3 check, and I can trade queens and draw the game. So I thought, okay, I only have one square, but I'm kind of hanging on. Instead, after king h8, white went for queen e5 check. And I think this was his concept, was to make me make a very difficult decision here because, my king has no squares. And the issue is that there's only one good way to block. Why don't you pause the video and figure out which is the correct way to block on f6? All right, hopefully you got a chance to figure out the right way to block on f6. It is super, super tricky, but the key move is actually rook f6. And the point is that if you play queen f6, amazingly, this move loses on the spot to rook f1. Point being that you can't take on f1 because there's this pin. And if you take on e5, there's rook f8 mate. So amazingly, there's only one way to block, and it's rook f6. And this actually holds on to the game because, if he takes on h3, I still have these perpetuals with queen f3 check. So that's fine. And, right, like if g takes queen f3, if he moves up, I can go queen f2. And then if he blocks, I can go queen f4 check and trade the queens. And if he blocks on g2, I can go queen takes h3 like so. So I do hold on there. But the key thing is that after rook f6, white has at least a draw and can also even go queen b8 and repeat here. But my opponent wanted more, and I think, again, it just kind of showed the ambition of JJ throughout the game. I mean, sometimes too ambitious, but, if I'm not able to punish it, it is what it is. And in this position, he saw I was low on time. He saw I had like a minute or so left. He had like 30, 40 minutes left, and he was like, all right, I'm going to give him a very, very tough problem with little time. And the move he played was rook d1. And rook d1, amazingly, is really a remarkable move. I mean, first of all, it threatens rook d8 checkmate, right? Because I can't block here because of this pin. But in addition to that, it's just super hard to defend that mate. And it would appear here that the position is like really quite compromised because, my king doesn't really have a great escape square, and it looks like his pieces are converging. Note that if I play a move like h6 to give myself the h7 square, I'm still in some really big trouble after rook d8. I mean, this would be a position that's really kind of dodgy. But in this position, there's one way to play after rook d1. And yeah, it's really difficult, but it's a remarkable solution. So why don't you pause the video and try to figure it out. All right, hopefully you got a chance to pause the video and figure this out. This one was honestly one of the most remarkable solutions, defensive solutions I think I've ever seen. I think it deserves to be in books. I was really shocked at this resource, and the fact that JJ actually saw it, but he was still willing to roll the dice because he thought that he would be able to hold a draw after the sequence. And the move is actually h takes g2. The point is that after rook takes g2, here's the real stunner. I thought I couldn't go for this because after, queen h4 check, after king g1, there are no checks. And I thought, okay, this is just gone. But it turns out in this position, after rook takes g2, there's the amazing queen takes g2. And the point is that after king takes, I could not believe my eyes. There's rook g7 check. And the point is that if the king goes to the h file, I have rook h6. And the thing that's so bewildering about this is my rook on f6 was pinned. And so I'm actually going rook g7. I'm pinning my g rook, but unpinning my f6 rook to facilitate this rook h6 check. Just truly unbelievable. And the point is, obviously, if king h2, rook h6 is just mate. Queen h5 and then takes, and it's just mate. And so the best move in the position for white now is to actually block with the queen. But since I'm taking with check, and then I'm taking on e6, I wind up being temporarily 2 pawns up. And, of course, there's no way I can lose this one. But the thing that he also calculated was that in this line, there's rook d8 check, king g7, rook d7, and rook takes a7. And that this position is pretty much a draw because once these 2 pawns are exchanged and black is just left with the extra h pawn, it's not enough to win. So, this game could easily fizzle out like so, and, there's just nothing kind of going on here. But I was just amazed that, he took the decision to play this rook d1 move, challenged me to find the solution with little to no time, and even if I find it, he's still not going to lose the game. So I thought it was very, very alert on his part and just good, savvy, practical chess. Unfortunately, in the minute or so I had left to kind of think on this position, that queen sacrifice did not cross my mind. It really did not cross my mind. And because it did not cross my mind, I went down very quickly. I decided to defend the back rank with rook e8. But this move does not help my position at all because now after e7, this pawn is further pushed, and now rook d8 is a threat again because white can just make a new queen and checkmate me. And again, I have this problem where the rook is pinned. My king is also can't move. This rook on e8 is tied down, and really the queen is the only one that's playing here. So unless I have a perpetual with the queen, there's just no way to save this game. So now I went h takes g2, and after rook takes, I went queen h4 check. Note that again, this sacrifice doesn't work anymore because I don't have this rook check anymore. Point is that if queen takes g2, king takes, I have rook g8 check, but after the king moves, this rook is pinned, so there's no checkmating idea like before. And, well, I didn't see the idea anyway, but that's a kind of important point. And after rook takes g2, I actually played, with like 20 seconds left, I played queen h4 check. And after king g1, I played h6, trying to give my king an escape square. But now white just played rook d6. And I have no checks, right? There's no checks for my queen. And this f6 rook is just hanging. So, yeah, I actually resigned in this position with like 10 seconds left on my clock. Tough way to go out, in particular because I thought the opening phase of the game I played reasonably, And then the middle game, I actually thought that the way he kind of artificially castled, I would definitely have some chance to take over the initiative. But I think I was actually a little bit too optimistic about my position. And, I did realize I had some attacking chances, but I kind of didn't attack principally. I kind of was thinking, I can kind of take my time, get all my pieces to the right squares, and then go forward. And I must say, I kind of missed his e4 move, kind of breaking open the position in the middle and giving him enough counterplay that kind of thwarted my attack. And I think the biggest takeaway is that I could have played g4 on maybe before move 20, move 17, move 18, but I wound up playing g4 almost 15 moves later on move 30 something, and it just did not have the same effect that it would have had if I really was kind of balls to the wall much sooner. So definitely needed to, kind of do something a little bit different than I did, and I was a little bit slow with my initiative and gave him time to consolidate. So yeah, I start off with a loss. It's always tough to start off with a loss in a tournament, but it is what it is, and I was going to try and recover in the next one. All right, that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. Please like and or subscribe to the channel. And if you want to support the Road to Grandmaster journey, please do so by making a donation in the PayPal link through the description below. Thanks. Take care.